I was talking to my podcast producer. She had sent me a couple of reels. She's in menopause. And she was saying to me, look what these people are promoting. It's like, the pink it and shrink it, right? It's like these, let's just do 30,000 little arm rotations. Let's do 2-pound dumbbells that happen to be pink. And so when we have women who are maybe, in perimenopause and menopause, this is my community, as you know, who have grown up as I have in this sort of cardio bunny, healthy is really what is code word for skinny, so maybe they're new to weights, let's say. How do they determine what lift, if there's okay, I'm going to listen to Ashley, I'm going to listen to Dr. Steph, and I'm going to go into the gym and I'm going to go where all the bros are and I'm going to lift some heavy weights. What does heavy weight mean?
I mean, we could talk about this the entire episode.
Well, I got no more questions after this.
We're just done. Well. Yeah. I mean, I think, so I guess the first place I would start would be perceived exertion. So there is some nuance and some subjectivity to all of this, whether we're talking healthy eating, heavy lifting, whatever. It's not black and white, one correct answer for everybody. So you can't say lifting heavy is you got to be shoulder pressing 45-pound dumbbells. That's not applicable to everybody, right? What we want to focus on is muscle tension and perceived exertion. So if it's hard for you, it's probably heavy. It may not be heavy to somebody else, or maybe what you're lifting is incredibly heavy to one friend and lightweight to another, right? What we want to do is we want to avoid going into the gym and wasting that precious hour of our day that we don't always get. It's really precious, important time that we're investing in ourselves. We don't want to waste it by kind of sitting around and letting our mind wander while we flop some weights around and don't really feel much. So some people don't like to go into the gym and lift 2 times their body weight in a deadlift. And so you don't have to do that either. I'm not here to, I don't know if I can swear, I'm not here to shit on Pilates or powerlifting. If you like one or the other, we can work within kind of any parameter, but you have to be working hard. You have to be challenging the muscle. And too often I see the stereotype again from, just like you, decades in the gym. I see guys tend to overestimate what they can lift and then half rep something that could crush their spine. And women tend to be in there underestimating what they can lift and kind of sitting there looking bored while they're shoulder pressing or tricep pull down or whatever. And I think maybe you're afraid of getting bulky. People are also afraid of injury, which is a very valid thing. So you start conservative and you pay attention to your perceived exertion. You pay attention to if your programming, for example, is telling you to do 3 sets of 10 reps of something and your 10th rep kind of feels like your first rep, the weight's too light. If you can barely do 3 reps with proper form, that weight's too heavy. There's somewhere kind of in the middle where you're exerting yourself, you're focusing on it, you're paying attention. You can't be kind of thinking about your grocery list or what you have to do next. You are focused on what you're doing. You're feeling the burn. You're feeling the work. You can still do it safely and appropriately. That's the sweet spot. And you need to kind of play within that. And of course, there's also someone's training age that you want to take into account. So training age is how experienced they are in the gym. If you're brand new, you don't want to be pushing people to do really heavy overhead barbell presses. You want to focus, maybe you focus on machines first. Maybe you make sure that person has a spotter. We don't want to injure people and we don't want to make people feel intimidated. But I think that women could probably really benefit both physically and also confidence-wise from going in there and pushing themselves a little bit and going outside of their comfort zone and kind of really getting more comfortable with what it feels like to really work hard when they're lifting. That's sort of an all over the place answer, but it's kind of a start, I guess, to how I feel about it.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think RPE is what you're describing here. So this rate of perceived exertion. I will often counsel people to think about, this is on a scale of, let's say 1 to 10 with, 10 being childbirth and 1 being you're walking down the street and you sort of want to be hitting it somewhere between 8 to 10, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 10. And that's really and that's going to change as well. To your point around training age, where you start, as you're building strength, as the muscle is growing, let's say you're doing, just for sake of ease, we're going to talk about bicep curls. So let's say you're curling 5 pounds, let's say when you first start, you should be progressing. You should not stay at 5 pounds. So as your strength and the muscle size increases, you can recruit more fiber. You have more of that neuromuscular connection to the muscle. That number is going to change. So you shouldn't stay at 5 or 10 or wherever you start as well, which I think is important. I wanted to actually just double click on time under tension. I think that this is such an important concept that, I mean, I love what you just said about men tend to overestimate and women tend to underestimate. I just saw an example of this morning. I was at the gym, it's leg day, and a guy was trying to bicep curl. Oh God, what was the weight? It doesn't even matter what it was. It was like 75 or 80 pounds. Yeah, it was too much. And literally his range of motion was like 3 degrees of elbow flexion. Like he could not move the weight. But I want to talk about time under tension, because one of the things that I think I see, I used to be also guilty of this as well. So calling myself out here is I would rush through the reps. So 10 reps and I would just be like 1, 2, 3, rather than actually thinking about getting my mind in the muscle and thinking about the contraction. So as the muscle is getting, if we're talking about biceps, to continue that example, as the bicep muscle is shortening, and then once I can no longer feel the bicep shortening on that eccentric or the descent, right? So the eccentric contraction, thinking about that. Talk to me a little bit about how we can manipulate time under tension as a factor or vertical in progressive overload.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. It's such a good topic. And it's so great when you learn about the concept of time under tension, because as you just said, it's another factor, another piece of the puzzle that can help us build muscle without necessarily upping the weight. And I think, going back to your observation today, like so much of this is about ego, and we could talk about gender differences all the time and how great it would be if maybe women could borrow just a little bit of that stereotypical male self-esteem, and maybe if men could borrow just a little bit of that common sense, and we could meld together the perfect mind. But I think, if you take the ego out of the number, I should be lifting this much. I watched this video of this super amazingly fit, jacked chick, and she lifted this, and that's what I want to lift, and I'm not even close. We can take the ego out of it and say, it does not matter what the weight is. It matters the time under tension, the muscle contraction, the effectiveness of the movement. And similar to your point, I'm going to call myself out too, being a meathead for so long. This is a relatively newer concept for me too, and it has come with, I think, a bit of wisdom and a bit of an ego shift, where maybe even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, I really cared that people were impressed by what I did in the gym. Like I was trying to be strong and fit and lift heavy weights. Now I care more about getting a good workout, making the best of my time, and being strong and functionally fit. And, if you want to be smug about it, there are people out there who are probably lifting less weight than you in the gym, but could very well be stronger because they're doing it in a more effective way by using things like time under tension. So I think that's just a really important thing to consider. And, if you are somebody who feels relatively comfortable, this is a whole other topic, but filming yourself doing a movement, not saying you have to set up a tripod in the gym. I'm just saying that these are the things that you don't necessarily notice when I am trying to do a tempoed lift. So again, I love the bicep curl example because I love a bicep curl, but even like squats, for example, if you're trying to do like a 3-second descent, maybe a 1-second pause at the bottom and then 2 seconds up or something, and you think you're doing it, and then you record yourself and you're like, I'm just going through this as quickly as I possibly can, because time slows when you've got a weight on your back, right?
Or you can see the way that you change the movement pattern. Like when you're getting like the squats, we're going to talk about squats because they're the bane of my existence, and I will master them. There's so much going on in a squat, but let's use that example. So we have the 3 tempo descent. Sometimes if you are not filming yourself, you will start seeing maybe your chest falling forward too quickly, or maybe your knees stop flexing, as you're coming down, and then all that's happening is you're sort of shifting the weight either posteriorly, or your pelvis is starting to tilt in a way that, is going to take the tension off the glutes, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many ways that a squat can go wrong. I love the idea of videotaping. And maybe it is a tripod. Like if you're by yourself, like I have the benefit of having an Insta husband who I'll be like,
I wish I
need you
had
to
one
film
of
me
those.
doing
I'm
this.
the opposite of that.
Well, because I want to see how I've done. And for squatting, for the longest time, my knees would stop flexing at a certain point. And then it was only once I started filming, I was like, oh my God, I got to work a little bit on my foot mechanics, my ankle mobility. And why is my knee stopping? Right at about 90, my knee stops flexing. But I would never have that feedback even though I might have been squatting in front of a mirror, you still don't have the 90 degree, you don't have the side, like the lateral angle. So I love that you brought up videotaping, because it can seem a little
and I'm just uncomfortable. Like, I don't want people like looking at me in the gym. And I know if I set up a camera, I'm like inviting people to be like, oh, what's she doing? But if you're doing it for reasons that are helpful to you. And I mean, again, I've done this even recently. Like, I'm counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, and I look at the video and it's 1, 2, 3. It's really fast because, again, it's just, it's harder in real time. Like, what's going on in your head is not always what's actually physically happening. So yeah, but going back to the time under tension, I think you were talking about concentric and eccentric. I think another area that people can really focus on that will really help, if we're just looking at muscle contraction and that the amount of time that your muscle is contracting and how that benefits muscle growth and hypertrophy, think about contracting your muscles during both the concentric and eccentric part of the movement. Because, again, going back to bicep curls, that's a really easy one. We think about contracting that muscle as we're lifting the weight up, and then we just drop it back down. Can you think about contracting your muscles when you're lowering the weight too? That's adding time under tension. I guarantee you that makes a bicep curl way more difficult to do. I think bicep curls are a really good sample example exercise to test some of these things, because it's a quote unquote relatively simple movement that is, it's a very isolating exercise. So you can use like a lighter weight. You can really think about it. You can really look at yourself in the mirror or really look at the video that you're taking and really spend some time with it and think about the difference between swinging your arm up and down 10 times and thinking, I am doing this movement to contract my bicep as hard as I possibly can during this movement. I want to slow it down to a 4-second concentric and a 4-second eccentric instead of just up down. And I want to feel how that feels over 10 reps. It's really incredible, the difference. And it just goes back to, again, if you're investing this time in yourself, if you're taking this really, really precious time out of your busy life to go and work out, let's, again, get rid of the ego, get rid of the comparison, get rid of what other people are doing, and think about, how can I challenge the muscle the most effectively in the time that I'm here? And time under tension is a really, really excellent sort of addition to think about. And also, if you're somebody who's newer and you are a little unsure about weight, if you're thinking like, I'm really not sure about the weight yet, I'm not really sure about what, exertion or, the perceived exertion thing or the reps in reserve, how many reps I could do. Like, if you're not really sure about that stuff yet, just slowing down the movement can really, really help increase the difficulty factor without kind of making any other changes.
I love that. I think for, continuing with the bicep, and I'll throw in shoulders here because I was actually recently called out by a guy and I was so thankful for it, because I was doing front raises with dumbbells and I could lift the dumbbell, I could lift it up to parallel, no higher, and then the weight would drop. Right. And he just came up to me like this big we always say, oh, bros, eye roll. But this guy was like the biggest guy in the gym, but probably the biggest teddy bear in the gym as well, too. He came up to me just out of nowhere and he said, can you lift that weight higher than your shoulder? Like, out of nowhere. And I was like, no. And he was like, all right, let me see it. So I did a rep, and it was, he saw that and he said, you're also dropping the weight too quickly, which means you can't control the weight. So I said, oh, okay. So I was doing, I can't remember what the number was. Let's just say 20 pounds. I forget the number. So I dropped it down to 15. Yep. And all of a sudden, it was like full range of motion. Like, I could get that front delt raise. I could get it all the way up. So like arm right at my ear, and then all the way back down with control. So that was, a moment of learning for me where I said, oh yeah, to your point, the eccentric also matters. So if you can get it up on the concentric and then you just drop it, as I was doing with that front raise, let's say, that's also an indication that that maybe you either need to drop, like strip the weight, drop the ego. You can totally do that as well. And then and I know that I'll eventually get back to whatever that weight was. Let's call it 20 pounds. And I'll be able to bring that, shoulder raise all the way up.
Yeah. And I mean, at the very least, you're kind of just wasting half the movement, right? Like, you could be getting more out of it. So why not?
Right. Yeah. Right.